Society Matters.
Hello, I'm Bernie Furshpan here at HMTV at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center on Long Island. And my series, Ordinary Heroes, has introduced to you many very interesting people. But today I have a very incredible human being who has done some great things and has a very interesting background. And I'm very excited to bring him on this episode, and that is Seth Shelden. Seth, you are a scholar. You're a law professor. You are an activist. You are a performer. You're also blushing as I'm saying all of this, but you are the General Counsel in the United Nations as a liaison for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. That's the ICAN. I've seen that logo many times, and I've often wondered about the things that they do, but we're going to find out a little bit about it today. You are also a 2017 Nobel Prize winning coalition participant. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this is to prohibit and eliminate nuclear weapons. That's quite a task. This particular organization, ICAN, seeks to prohibit nations from developing, testing, producing, transferring, processing, stockpiling, and using or threatening the use of nuclear weapons. That's a huge undertaking, especially today in this heated political arena. You were intrigued in high school by a book that you read, Hiroshima. And that kind of projected you into a trajectory that became unstoppable, I guess. It had a profound impact on your life. And has any of the other students in your high school, were they impacted in the same way? And how did it impact you that it sent you off on this journey?
Well, when I think about that, I think about how everything that has ever happened, perhaps in human history, is about storytelling, ultimately. And how I think, like many people born and raised in the U.S., as I was, we have a framing around the history of World War II that is sort of part of our, very much baked into our education and our consciousness. And so you have a certain perspective on, from your formal education and from the stories that your elders tell you about why weapons were used in the way they were used, and why the United States dropped the bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki exactly 80 years ago this summer, by the way. And so it takes a pretty powerful story to disrupt that sort of, embedded thinking. And for me, that was probably, as you say, John Hersey's Hiroshima, originally published in New Yorker magazine, that told the story of, from a first-hand perspective of what was really happening to real people who were really there, as opposed to the framing of security policy and military history that I think is the way it's framed for us usually. And that was just, perhaps just one sort of lighthouse in my reorienting of the way I think about nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction, security policy, and military history, and shaped my life. As you say, and thank you for the generous introduction of me and of our campaign. You're right. It's an enormous task that we have before us. But when you were saying that, I was also thinking to say that we have many existential crises that face humanity, and for that matter, all life. I think climate chaos and structural inequity. And I think intolerance and all human-made disasters. And of them, this one, the elimination of nuclear weapons, is by far the easiest to solve. So I see it as quite a hopeful story that we are in the middle of, and hopefully helping point people toward the right ending to.
That's why I consider you a hero, because an ordinary hero, because your goal is to bring humanity together, to unite people, to see that we all have a common ground, and there's no reason to continue to threaten each other. And if we can all live in harmony, it's a dream that we all have, but you can't give it up, because if you do, the other side's going to take over. So I think this is a wonderful endeavor. I grew up as a second-generation Holocaust survivor. I had a different kind of upbringing. Are your parents, any one of your parents, Holocaust survivors?
They're all Eastern European,
right?
And they
so
all
you had
left
family,
in the 20th
perhaps.
century and so yes. But I think my 4 grandparents all came before. Yeah.
So they
so
came to the United States.
In some cases just before.
So my upbringing was maybe a little bit different. My parents had a lot of anxiety, and they were paranoid, and anytime they heard of any conflict around the world, they were glued to the TV. I remember my dad was glued to the TV even during the time of the Vietnam War. They understood war very well, and they saw the atrocities. And I'm sure that they were hoping for their kids a better world. And I'm sure your parents, I happen to know your mom. And how has your upbringing impacted you in the way you see the world?
Yeah, I would say that, both of my parents, who are steeped in liberal arts and in music and literature, that's the education and the background that I had. But they were also very progressive-minded, as I think many people in our community where I grew up in Brooklyn were. They were, but in some cases, and in particular, the legacy of my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, and my mother were rooted in activism and in pursuing justice for marginalized people. I think that's the tradition that I was raised in,
It's quite a legacy,
and very much influenced the way I think I'm a very I'm a New Yorker, so I have this sort of air of cynicism about the way I go about the world sometimes, and you sort of think that what can I do? And
what part of Brooklyn did you grow up?
Canarsie.
Canarsie. Okay,
Yeah.
so I lived in Mill Basin.
Oh, okay.
Actually, and Marine Park.
Neighbors.
Yeah, we're neighbors, so it was a tough neighborhood.
Yeah, it was. I guess it changes a lot decade to decade, but it was. That was part of it too. I think I had to have a pretty thick skin and get out of trouble a lot of the time, and I think that shaped as well the way I thought about a lot of things growing up. And you kind of sometimes and I think wherever you are in the world, no matter what your upbringing is, it is human nature to fall into a bit of zero-sum thinking, and if that person has something, I can't have it. And that's the trap of life. We have to. It takes a lot of work for some, depending on what your upbringing is, to sort of break out into a philosophy and a life value of someone else having something doesn't take anything from me, and in fact, the more I can bring to other people, the more I get too. That sounds, I think. For some people, it's hard to really wrap your head around. But then once you live that life, then you realize how that's where true happiness and fulfillment comes from.
Absolutely. They say that the arts, and you've been involved in the arts for many years, your entire life actually, it sort of unites and heals people. Did you find that the case, and how can you incorporate that into your life and into your work?
Yes, I do find it. Of course, there's a big part of my brain that is just creative and not analytical at all, and I live very happily in that world. And so it is sometimes something that's strange for for me, or perhaps it's for others, to reconcile like how I live in both these worlds. And I guess the way I think about it is they're ultimately synergistic in different ways. I mean, there's the part of it that ultimately in the arts we are telling stories, but also that's what law and advocacy is about as well. You're telling stories to advocate, and they're very complementary skill sets in many ways. You know, you're pursuing a certain kind of truth in both cases, and to me that's been a fulfilling kind of synergy. But the other way I guess I think about it is in terms of, you know, why we do all the things we do as human organisms walking around the planet. It's like you have on one hand law and policy. That's like what we do to make order out of the world, whether it's to know how to drive on the streets or, you know, who is owed what when, you know, there's some dispute or anything like this. But who cares? I mean, why do it? And to me, that's what art is all about. It's like that's art and creativity is what makes the world worth living in. You know, that's why we're doing it. And so it's fun to be in the world of both the what and the why of human existence for me.
Well said.
Oh, thanks.
Really well said.
I've been thinking
I have to think more the way you think. You have an open mind, and you're very intelligent.
Oh.
And the fact that you're involved with ICAN, and I don't even know how you got involved, but let's find out how you did. I know that you did receive 2 scholarships, right? The Fulbright scholarships. One in a school in Latvia, the other one in Japan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And so how did that the studying there align you with this particular topic of nuclear arms?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the Fulbright programs for me were professor exchange programs at that point. So I was teaching law.
And you got fellowship degrees from that? Is that correct?
Not degrees, but I was
fellowships.
Teaching. Yeah, basically, yeah. I was in Eastern Europe teaching law for a couple of years. And that was incredibly enriching and educational. I'm sure I learned a lot more than I taught. And similarly, then I got another Fulbright program that took me to Japan. And it was while I was in Japan teaching law that I visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki for the first time and connected the dots backwards in a way from all of the interests I had growing up. I mean, perhaps starting with John Hersey's Hiroshima, as you mentioned, but you know, that was my undergraduate work was around nuclear weapons policy. I just never really did anything with it professionally. So then I'm there and sort of thinking a lot more about these histories and thinking to myself, I really want to be working on this. What am I doing with my life? And when I got back to the U.S., I elbowed my way into the campaign that I'm in now, and it's been this roller coaster ever since.
You found the purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had other purposes, but you know,
we all do, right?
I think
this one really triggered something.
Well, yeah, I think it has been a very passionate endeavor ever since. And when you're in a world of like activism and sometimes a chaotic kind of NGO kind of lifestyle, passion's pretty important, I think, to keep it going. But in this case, it has been absolutely exhilarating. I think, you know, just to say something about the campaign, maybe if you introduced us, but I think we are the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, as you said, and our mission is to prohibit and eliminate nuclear weapons. And we were the main civil society organization that helped inspire the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which we negotiated, governments negotiated and wrote in 2017, but we were the main advocates in the rooms and helping to advance the process. And the treaty was adopted on July 7th, 2017, so almost exactly.
And how many countries have signed off on this treaty?
Well, skip ahead. I'll skip ahead. Sure.
Sorry.
I'm happy to. I mean, on July 7th, because the thing about a United Nations treaty is it has quite a multi-stage process, right? So we don't have to go through. I'll skip to the end. But on that day, first, on July 7th, the date of the vote of adoption, 122 countries voted in favor of it. So that's essentially
substantial.
Yeah. Well, that was certainly a big milestone, and in fact, that success was very much unanticipated by a lot of powers that be, and is a big reason that we won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. Later that year. So we won it for our work to advance the treaty and also to raise awareness about the humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. But to answer your question, now skipping to today, in this moment in 2025, it turns out that exactly half of the world's countries, going by UN math, of the countries that can take a treaty action, they say, like can sign a treaty or ratify a treaty, half of them have done so now. Right. So we have 98 countries that have become either states parties to the treaty, meaning that they've ratified it or acceded to it, or have signed it, meaning that they've expressed their intention or they're working on joining it. So that's half of the world, and this is despite, I think, these great challenges by strong powers, strong countries that have an interest in the status quo to stop it. And I think that increasingly, as we build this global majority, which we're just one country away from, we know that this is the answer. This is the best answer, at least.
Well, congratulations!
Thank you
on your major accomplishment. And who enforces the treaty? Is it the United Nations? Is it your organization?
Well, I think first of all, when it comes to international law, it's a little different than sort of domestic laws, or criminal laws, let's say. It's not like there is a police officer that comes and arrests people. There are, of course, institutions for doing that, but it's country by country in terms of how certain international law can be enforced. So signatories to the Rome Statute, for example, have an obligation to bring those countries that violate international criminal law to The Hague, for action there. In the case of a treaty like this, what we're talking about is the weight of international politics and security policy in general to enforce, just like this is the case with many treaties, most treaties, that we build the norms and we build the law. And then when there's a violation, then the states parties to these treaties get together and think of ways to enforce their will, enforce the rules that they've all agreed to. Ideally, this is not a matter of force in any case. I mean, that's the whole idea of a cooperative multilateral structure because I think when some people ask the question, the way you frame it, they're like, well, where's the army to go in there and stop it?
Understood.
The whole point of this is to avoid that.
Correct. To avoid the conflict, really.
Yeah, and in large part to avoid it by changing the entire political philosophy around the necessity for the offending behavior in the first place, which I think people, especially in the U.S., where I think we have perhaps the most skeptical view of international law in the world. It takes perhaps some illustration to see how well that actually does work in practice. And we have all these other treaties, not for nuclear weapons, but before nuclear weapons, for other weapons of mass destruction, that have been since before they were in force. These were massive problems that we were talking about. And massive concerns. And with the treaties, we have built a world where, it has stigmatized the behavior of those possessor states. Like, you hear states today boasting about, I'm a nuclear power, a nuclear weapon state. You don't hear states being like, I'm a biological weapon state, as if that's some badge of honor. Through the Biological Weapons Convention, we have not only made these weapons illegal, but we've made them rather irrelevant. That's the theory of change, is that, once you reframe what security means, you build a world where the transgressors are increasingly marginalized. They don't have an interest in pursuing these in general. And when there is a violation, there's a larger group of states, group of people, group of institutions that are wanting to do something about it, whether it's sanctions, whether it's, in some cases, it could be force, but I mean, we have all these other mechanisms of political unions that are able to do something about it. And so, to me, there's the fundamental question, like, why, you're sort of asking, like, well, why make it illegal if you can't enforce something? There are lots of good reasons why. I think it changes behavior.
Well, it definitely drives the society in a certain direction and makes them conscious of what you're trying to do, right? And that's to eliminate nuclear weapons altogether, which is really a very difficult thing to do because a lot of countries believe that it actually ensures security around the world. This is their philosophy, and it's going to be hard for them to let it go.
Right. Well, when you say a lot of countries, but I would just point out it's still the vast minority of countries that think that.
Is that right?
And
I'm not aware of that, but
yeah. Well, it's because we live in one of those countries.
Right. That's right.
I think
Understood.
makes it harder to sort of see the international perspective.
What is your hope for the future?
Well, I have many hopes for the future.
Right.
I think one of them is that we are able to see the rationale for why nuclear weapons do not provide security, as you say, how we can change our minds in this country.
Right, and you have a convincing and compelling argument about that.
Oh, many. I think we have all of the convincing and compelling arguments around it. But when it comes to hope, I mean, first of all, I have no doubt that transformation will happen. To me, the only question is whether it happens before or after there's a great catastrophe. I think that...
Hasn't a catastrophe already happened once before?
Yes, but if you can imagine, I think, if you can try to imagine that the catastrophe that we commemorate, if you're referring to the
Hiroshima.
U.S. dropping bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the orders of magnitude worse that any use of nuclear weapons would be today. This was pre-thermonuclear weapons, of course, pre-Castle Bravo. Yeah. When we say much more, weapons have been detonated on the order, if you can imagine this, on the order of more than 3,000 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb. Wow. So that weapon has been disassembled, by the way, and is not in commission, which also
that would carve out a piece of the planet. When
the weapon I'm talking about, which is referred to as the Tsar Bomba, was so-called tested, in other words, detonated, it caused windows to shatter in other countries. I mean, it was so powerful. But that also speaks to, just if I may, the legacy of nuclear weapons going beyond Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So Hiroshima and Nagasaki were... those bombs were dropped, as I mentioned, 80 years ago this very summer, August 6th and August 9th, 1945. But before that, the U.S. bombed itself.
Right.
The Trinity detonation in New Mexico, July 16th, 1945, was the first detonation of nuclear weapons. Many people now know that story by having watched the movie Oppenheimer. Right. But that movie leaves out some of, I would say, many of the details about nuclear weapons and what they do. We now know, based on research from just a few years ago, that initial use of nuclear weapons caused radioactive fallout to spread to 46 U.S. states and Canada and Mexico, and has caused harm to local and indigenous communities, but also people all around North America. Then, the next detonations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki only preceded 2,000 more detonations of nuclear weapons through a period of decades where ultimately nine states would then go on to develop and test. They say test, but I don't like to use that word because for a community that is impacted by the detonation, it doesn't matter whether it's used in war or, in science or development. It's still, the impacts are still
Right, I
the
think
same.
people take the term test very lightly. They were just testing it, but they don't realize it is an explosion. It is, maybe nobody gets killed, but it's definitely, there's a fallout. There's going to be a lot of damage and
in fact, millions of people have
and
been
a lot of
killed
harm
by it,
to nature itself. I mean,
Exactly.
people don't think about the
No, that's a good
animals
point.
and
Yeah.
you know and the rest of nature, including plants.
Yep.
So
No,
this
that's
was
a very
this
good
was an
point.
incredible discussion. I am enlightened by you. You have a lot to share and a lot to do and a lot to accomplish, and I give you all the credit, honestly, for taking on this task and making this a journey for your life. It's an endeavor that most of us probably would shy away from. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for being a hero for humanity, for nature, for the world.
Well, I mean, at the same time, I think I'd like to thank you too. I haven't visited the Tolerance Center yet. I'm here for the first time and looking forward to seeing it. But I think for people like yourself who are trying to tell the story about the importance of humanity and tolerance, to make the connections to other great existential threats,
Correct.
is, I think, a really is a wonderful vision that I think you have. And so by inviting me to join you and to tell our story, I'm very grateful to make these connections, because people, I think, you know, the common themes of the missions that we have, I think, are very they're very clear to me.
Very clear, yeah.
But I think maybe other people need help to see sometimes who
We
don't
do
work
have
in
a
these
common
spaces.
vision. I mean, definitely it overlaps in terms of we want to see society and humanity have a better future. And and a lot of the atrocities and these issues that we're talking about are just the last 100 years. So we have to put some kind of brakes to the direction of society so that it doesn't become irreversible, especially the damages that you're talking about. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to meet you and to open up that hood of yours and see what's underneath.
Wow.
So I appreciate that. And I wish you the very best, and we'll be in touch to find out how things are working out.
Great.
Really
Hope to have good
appreciate
news for you soon.
And I want to thank all of you for joining us here on Ordinary Heroes. I'm Bernie Furshpan.